Hello, everyone, and welcome to the DRC Insight Technology Review for the Wisconsin Forward exam. We're going to cover today more of an overview and refresher for the administration. I do want to note that we do have another webinar that we have recorded that has a lot more details in there. It's more of a training webinar that has more details around setup and more details around introduction to the system. So if this webinar is not enough and you would like more information on setup and an overview of DRC Insight, I encourage you to take a look at that. That webinar has also been recorded and is on the DRC Insight portal download page where you found this presentation. So we're going to start with just reviewing key dates associated with the Wisconsin Forward exam. We're going to review common terminology that DRC is using in our training and documentation going forward. We'll spend a few minutes talking about what's changing and what's not changing for 2020. There's a lot more that's not changing, so we just want to ground everybody on what needs to happen in order to get ready for the Wisconsin Forward exam administration for spring 2020. We'll review the DRC system and network requirements, and then wrap up by doing an overview or kind of an introduction of the new Central Office Services interface and cover a couple common questions we get into customer service around how to manage a COS configuration. So we'll walk through those as well. So the first thing we want to cover is key dates. This presentation and the training presentation are both available on November 21st on the DRC Insight portal. And all of our technology readiness documentation is available on both the DPI website and the DRC Insight portal. And that was available back on November 14th. We want to make you aware of a couple other webinars, live webinars that we'll be hosting for DTCs and give you an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll be, hopefully be able to answer them for you live. And that will, there will be 3 of them, one on January 15th, one on February 12th, and another one then on March 11th. Another key date to be aware of is that on January 22nd, all of the student data will be pulled from DPI and be loaded into the DRC Insight portal for all the student data. So all the students will be loaded into the system on January 22nd. So on the after that date, you'll be able to go into the portal and do any kind of student management and test management that's necessary. All in preparation for the Wisconsin Forward exam window that opens up on March 23rd and then runs through May 1st. So we do want to recommend that you regularly check out the timeline, the up-to-date timeline on the Forward exam calendar website. There's a link to it here that, this website will have the most current information on terms of timelines. So now we're going to spend just a couple minutes talking about terminology. Going forward, we're really trying to be more consistent in terms of how things are referred to, how applications and functionalities referred to within the DRC Insight set of applications. So I'll first start out with the DRC Insight Secure Applications, and we'll get into more detail as to what these are in a minute. But that makes up really two specific applications: the DRC Insight Secure Browsers, which are available through the DRC Insight portal, and then the DRC Insight Secure Apps. They're available from the vendor app stores. They do the same thing, but from the standpoint of where you get them and how they're installed on your devices are different. And so that's the distinction between the secure browser and secure apps. The other term we want to introduce or talk about is the DRC Insight Test Engine. That is different than the DRC Secure Applications. The DRC Secure Applications is something you install on every single testing device. The Test Engine is what is downloaded at the very beginning of the test, and that's what the students are interacting with. So you don't have to do anything with it, but the actual interface that students are taking the test in is not the DRC secure apps. It is the DRC test engine that comes down. The other application that you're very familiar with and have been using is a DRC Insight portal, and that's formerly known as eDirect. As we move more and more functionality and capabilities into what was eDirect, we felt it was in our best interest to really rebrand it and given now it's kind of new capabilities, and we'll be referring to it going forward as the DRC Insight portal. The other capability that's been out there for a little while, for a couple years within the DRC Insight portal, is Central Office Services, or COS. That is where you have gone into and maintained your configurations and your content and your testing devices. It was formerly known or sometimes referred to as the device toolkit, but we have, again, focused now on a common term of Central Office Services. And again, within that, you're managing COS configurations, and we'll talk about what those are in a minute. And then the COS service device, which is what's replaced the TSM for content hosting. And we refer to it now as content hosting versus content caching. So what's changing and what's not changing? So the biggest change from last year, even though some sites started using it last year, is the COS service device now replacing the TSM in COS configurations. So all of your content management and content hosting will now be done with the COS service device. The TSM was retired and no longer supported or allowed as of this past summer and fall. The other thing with the TSM going away, we no longer support response caching. The TSM was designed and response caching was designed when the internet was really the bottleneck for testing, and now it's really changed to a lot more of the challenges are more locally on the Wi-Fi, keeping devices connected. So extended retries was introduced last year, and you were using it last year and very successfully to improve that student experience. So what's being updated? As we do every year in the end of June is we update the DRC secure applications, and they're now version 10.x, and the COS service device, which is now version 3.x. We do that every year mainly because new things happen from an operating system standpoint that we need to add enhancements to the DRC secure applications to, again, create that secure testing experience. I want to emphasize or spend a little time on what's not changing. With the TSM going away and the COS service device coming in, there's, I think, a lot of thinking that, well, that means I have to start all over and I have to create new COS configurations and start over with testing devices and all that, and that's not the case. You're able to use the exact same COS configurations and COS organized IDs that you've been using. What we'll be doing is pulling the TSM out and putting the COS service devices in. All of the relationships that have already been established with testing devices are unaffected. So we want to be really clear that that is not does not impact those COS service or COS configurations. And again, to emphasize, we continue to support the most commonly used devices that are going to show up in the classroom. So Windows, Mac, Linux, iPads, and Chrome devices. So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the system requirements for the 2020 testing year. So again, every year we release the system requirements 3 times. The main one is in June, on June 20, end of June when we release the software. And those are the specifications you can really count on for the rest of the year for what our device specifications are going to be for testing devices and COS service devices. At that time, we also talk about what operating systems are supported and anything we see that's coming down the road. In October, so we updated it at the end of October, and we'll do another update in February before testing. Just as new information comes in around operating systems and where we are. So like when iPad OS came out, We talked about that in the October and where we were on supporting that. That was not discussed in June because it wasn't available. So those are kind of things you will see in the October and February updates. So these are the specifications for the DRC secure applications. Again, supported on Windows, Mac, Chrome devices, iPads, and Linux devices. So again, we give examples of the minimum processor speeds, minimum memory, but pretty much this information is not changed really in the last couple of years. The only one that's really changed is maybe the iPad, where as Apple has enhanced the iPad operating system, it's taken more memory, leaving less for applications running on it. So we now recommend or require 2 gig of RAM, but that's pretty much the case now for all the iPads that are supported by Apple are already at that 2 gig limit or minimum. These are the system requirements for the COS service device. Again, it's supported on Windows, Mac operating systems, and the Linux platforms. We recommend ideally that's running on a dedicated device. That does not mean that it has to be physical. It can be virtual devices as well. It's just that configuration does not have anything else running on it. It can. Why we recommend that you don't is one of the changes with central office services versus the TSM is it will use whatever hardware capacity you have, so CPU and memory. So if other things aren't running on that device, that makes all the CPU and memory available for the COS service device to give it a little bit more scalability. One other thing that we get questions on, we want to just address here real quick is, again, it does not run on the COS service device, does not run on the Chrome or iPad platforms, mainly because those platforms just don't have enough horsepower, CPU, memory, and storage to be able to handle what's happening on the COS service device. That does not mean we don't support those desktops or those testing devices. We absolutely support Chrome and iPad testing devices. You can mix. You don't have to have a Windows COS service device does support and interact with a Chrome testing device. So the two of them do not have to match. One other thing that we have done now is we've provided a little bit better view of samples of different configurations that we've tested, and we've moved away from specific processors and moved to a CPU benchmark, because we'd indicate we tested it on an i3 processor or equivalent, and what does that mean? So now we moved away from that or equivalent and actually giving you access to a benchmark where you can actually see what your CPU ratings are and how they match up to what we have here. I also want to note that it does not mean you can't go past 750 testers. That's just concurrent testers on a device. That's just where we stopped. If you have more CPU and more memory, you can get a lot more scalability with it. We've had some sites scale up to over 3,000 on a single COS service device. So these are just guidelines. These are not prescriptive on what you can and can't do. From a DRC support policy standpoint, I want to cover that real quick before we talk about, specifically where we are with different operating system support and refresh folks on what this comes out of the system requirements document. And we really have a 4-phased approach where when something is new or introduced, it goes into phase 1 where we provide best effort support. It goes into full support generally within 30 to 90 days. After it's released. We really try to keep it a lot closer to that lower end of 30 days. And then when a vendor retires something, an operating system or a device, we will do best effort support for a period of time to give you an opportunity to move off of it until it moves to end of support. One thing I want to just highlight real quickly is we have a statement in here that we can't guarantee a resolution. That really applies more to phase 3. As new operating systems are introduced, we may not be able to support them right away, but we will have workarounds and we will do what we need to do from a software update standpoint to get it to fully support it. So there isn't a situation that, that I can think of where something new would hit the environment that it won't get to full support. Where we run into more challenges is where if there is a retired operating system and in order to get it to work when it's in that best effort phase, the vendor has to update that operating system. They aren't likely going to do that. So that's really more where we get into where it's more out of DRC's hands as to whether or not we can, keep things working. But we will work with you in those cases to see what we can do to get onto another supported device. So how that applies to operating systems, as you can see here, this is from the requirements document, lists off all the different operating system versions that we support within Windows, Mac, Linux, iPad, or iOS, iPadOS, and Chrome. A couple of things I want to call out here in terms of Windows 7 and Windows Server 2008. As you're likely aware, those come off of support from Microsoft in January of 2020. DRC is committed to, even though under our policy those would move to best effort support, to maintain support of the DRC applications throughout the testing year through June of 2020. What we do for next year, we'll have more information about that as we get closer to the 2020-2021 testing year. But for right now, be assured that DRC will support those retiring operating systems. This is an example when I look at the Mac 10.15, where it was introduced, and these were, again, the specifications that were released in October. It was introduced at the end of September. During October and November, we've been doing best effort support. We will move that to actually full support at the end of November with our November release on the 25th, where we will remove the whitelisting warning to users that it is now, it will be a fully supported version. Again, where we come into another best effort support example would be within Chrome. We have listed right now that we will support best effort support for any Chrome 74 or above operating system version. We provide full support for the stable release channel. And again, it's very unlikely that anything on 74 or above is going to have an issue because we've done full testing of our software on there. But if there was something that came up, again, very unlikely, but if somebody did come up with, say, Chrome 74 and it was causing an issue in testing and Google wasn't going to respond to it, we would still do what we could to keep those devices moving forward. So I want to take another couple minutes just talking about device support. We get a lot of questions about that as to, mainly around the iPads and the Chrome OS devices, around vendors dropping support for them, and so therefore where do we fit? DRC's policy is, we will support our software on vendor-supported devices, again, as long as they meet the requirement. So, in a sense, when a vendor moves to end of support of a device, we will move into best effort support for a short period of time. And the examples of this, again, more frequently are within the iPads and the Chrome devices. So within the iPad, Apple supports iPads that run their supported operating systems. So as soon as they retired iOS 11, if any device stopped its running, was only capable of supporting iOS 11 and not iOS 12, Apple dropped support for it. And we are really then in a position of, if the vendor isn't supporting it, there isn't a lot we can do. So we may do best effort for a little period of time, but you really need to be on a supported operating system for iPads for us to be able to provide full support. The other scenario that we're seeing very frequently now as Chrome devices have been out in the environment for the last 5 or 6 years, we're starting to see Google's policy come into play. Google's policy around support is they will support devices and for Chrome OS based on generally 5 or 6 years after a device's first production date, not the date you purchased it, but the date that it first went into production. That's typically 6 years. So we'll get into this in a minute a little bit more, but so just that's how Google has determined their support policy for Chrome OS devices. So really our guidance is, when purchasing new devices, look at the most recently manufactured dates for both iPads and Chromebooks that you can afford. A lot of times you're going to see, really cheap prices on some iPad or some Chrome devices. It's mainly because they only have maybe a year or so left of production support, and then you get surprised. So really keep that in mind, the manufacturing date when buying iPads and Chrome devices. So just a little bit more about Chrome devices and Google's policy around that. So every device that runs Chrome OS has an auto update expiration date. So that is the date that Google will determine when they will stop supporting or supporting automatic updates to the operating system to those devices. And again, that's not the date you purchased it, it's the date that it really first hit production. When that happens, Google, again, will no longer guarantee that the operating system updates will work on that device. There are no more security or functionality updates that are tied to the operating system for that device. And in many cases, they will drop or shortly afterwards drop the ability to manage those devices within the Google Management Council. So again, this is policy that Google has had in place, probably not as well known or understood. Here's a URL for you to check out your Chrome devices and what their AUE date is. DRC's position is we will support these devices in that unmanaged situation as long as they are running Chrome 74 or above for this year. So we will provide best effort support for those devices, again, running 74 or above, even though Google may not fully support them within their Google management environment. So where do you find the specifications? Again, we recommend that you don't refer back to this presentation or webinar for the specifications. We really recommend that you go to the DRC Insight portal to get the most current requirements, and those are again available under general information on the downloads page. You scroll down to the bottom and there's a view system requirements tab that will present the updated most current system requirements. Network specifications. I want to just cover that real quick, but first start kind of with an overview of how network traffic flows during a Wisconsin Forward exam. And ideally, you have COS service devices hosting content more locally for students. I mean, it is a requirement for any accommodated test and highly recommended if you're doing a WIDA assessment in the environment. In those cases, all that content comes down to that COS service device before the test, and it comes from DRC's content distribution network at Amazon. I also want to say this is kind of an eye chart. I recommend that maybe you look at the printed version of the slides and print off this page and kind of have it to be able to reference. So I don't intend you to really kind of read this all now. But during the test, when a student logs into a test, the first thing that's going to happen when they launch the DRC Insight Secure application is it's going to connect back to DRC, and in that connection is when the test engine comes down. And that's about 2 meg of data that's coming down to each testing device. At that point, the student's credentials are verified, very little traffic. We come back and say these are the tests the student can take. Once the student selects that test, then we download the entire set of content for the Wisconsin Forward exam down to the testing device. And that can be based on the test between 2 to 5 meg. Ideally, again, that's coming from the COS service device. If for whatever reason that's not there or you don't have it configured, that will come from DRC over the internet and then over your wide and local area networks. Once the test is started and the content is there and the test engine is there, the amount of data going back and forth from a response standpoint is very, very small, 5 to 10K. And so just to note that really the most network intensive time for a DRC Insight test is at the beginning, when test engine is coming down and when content's coming down. So what we have seen a lot of sites do to be able to better leverage their network is to just stagger just by a minute or two when students are logging in to be able to spread that 2 meg and 5 meg of data coming down to the workstations. And then again, once everyone's logged in and ready to go, the network bandwidth requirements are pretty minimal. Knowing that Wisconsin is also a WIDA state where you may be doing WIDA access assessments for their English language learners, it uses the exact same technology, the same software. So I just want to give you just a quick highlight on kind of what's maybe a little bit different about that. So really the difference is in the content and how that affects your network. When a WIDA test is taken, instead of all the content coming down at the beginning of a test, like the Wisconsin Forward exam, it is loaded down item by item or question by question. So as the student navigates through the test, 2 to 3 meg is coming down every time they get to a new page as we're loading images and loading down the audio. So instead of, so that 2 to 3 meg that you were experiencing at the very beginning of the test for the Wisconsin Forward happens throughout the test. The good news is that generally you're testing a lot fewer students at the same time for the WIDA access test versus the larger numbers you're going to be doing for the Wisconsin Forward exam at the same time. The other difference is just to note that the WIDA access test has a speaking component to it for one of the tests, a speaking test, where we actually are capturing the student's audio response. That's going to be a little bit bigger. It's about 600K going over the network back to DRC. But again, likely fewer of those students taking that at the same time. So again, the biggest impact is really more to your network resources. You're using the same DRC Insight portal. WIDA brands it as WIDA AMS, but it's the same application, same functionality for administration and management. So from a network setup, I again encourage you to really reference the Technology User Guide Volume 1 for the most latest information. But these are the URLs that you need to whitelist and the ports that need to be open on the servers and on the testing devices for the assessment to function. Ideally, if you can wildcard drcdirect.com, that is kind of best. There's still some other URLs you would have to do there. So if your network allows it, less URLs you have to put in. Well, another thing that we recommend, if you can, is give DRC traffic priority on your network to, again, give the students a more positive testing experience where they're taking priority over other traffic that may be happening on the network, like emails or videos being downloaded in labs that are not actually active in the testing. So if you can do network shaping, we encourage you to do that. All right, the next thing we want to talk about is how to manage COS configurations. And so as you can see, the COS dashboard has now been refreshed. It's got a little bit different feel to it than what we had with the previous dashboard. All the functionality is the same, but we've updated it really for 2 reasons. One is to increase the usability of it, and the other is to improve the accessibility, to make the site more ADA accessible. So one of the things you'll notice right away is the donuts have gone away. They kind of give you the visual of the status of the site. It's now represented more in table or bar chart view, which is much more accessible. Same information, just presented now more in a just a different visual. Down below on the bottom half of the dashboard, again, the same information around the different COS configurations are available at that site. And, you know, in this case, there's 2. You have the information around the number of devices in it. We've changed a little bit, again, for accessibility, the status of it. It used to be a little thumb up or thumbs down in a different color. Hard to see from a usability standpoint and hard to actually interpret from an accessibility standpoint. So this site was introduced within Wisconsin a few weeks ago. Again, functionality you're going to see is going to be very much the same. So we're going to walk through just a couple scenarios around managing COS configurations that we get common questions on. One is around how to manage programs, testing programs within a location. Now that a COS service device can support multiple testing programs, so in your case, for example, the Wisconsin Forward exam and then the WIDA Access exam, how to add that to an existing configuration rather than having to start all over again. How to determine a little bit more about how to do, you know, manage content within the site and indicate what content you want the COS configurations to be able to host, and then also how to manage and move around testing devices. So again, to access the COS configuration, same way as before. It's a, you know, the name is a link. You click on the name, and it will open up the page that has the different tabs on it for navigating through the Central Office Services COS configuration management. It will open up to the configuration information page, but I moved over already to the locations to talk about how do I add a WIDA content to a existing configuration that has Wisconsin. So up in the testing programs, I've already put in the WIDA program in the drop-down and already selected the Wisconsin sample district to correspond with the Wisconsin Forward sample district, and you'll click on Add Site. Once you've done that, now this site has the ability to host both the Wisconsin Forward exam and the WIDA Access and WIDA Screener tests. So the next thing is, now how do I actually, you know, then select and manage the content? Now that I've added, in this case, the WIDA Screener and WIDA Access, how do I actually go in and manage the content? So you go to the Content Management tab, and in this case, the Forward exam and the sample items were already checked and the appropriate accommodations were selected. So to add in the WIDA content, you would select those administrations, whichever one you want. If you didn't want the sample items and you're only going to be testing, say, the access test instead of access screener, you can select that again to give you more control over how much content is being hosted on a COS service device. Once you've determined that, you would just click Update Configuration, and now this COS service device and this COS configuration can now be used to host and deliver both Wisconsin Forward exams and the WIDA Access tests as well. The next thing I want to cover is how to manage now testing devices within a configuration. I'm going to kind of walk through 3 different ways to do that. And one is, if I have testing devices in one COS configuration and I want to move them to a different COS configuration, how do I do that? The other is, how do I actually deploy, using your software distribution mechanism, deploy a script out to the testing devices to automatically assign them to a COS configuration, or how do you do it manually? So in order to move testing devices between COS configurations, you go to, the first thing you want to know is the org unit ID of that target COS configuration, so the one you want to move them to. So again, you find that org unit ID, within Central Office Services. In this case, this is the receiving org unit ID. So, make sure you know the org unit ID for the one you want to move it from. You select the testing devices you want to move. So in this case, I'm moving the second one and the fourth one, and I would click on Move. Once you've done that, a pop-up will come up and say, okay, what's the target org unit ID that you want to move these to? You would either paste that in there or type it in there, and you click Move, and now those testing devices are now moved from the old org unit ID and now from this org unit ID, excuse me, to the new target org unit ID. So they would now become part of that COS configuration. The other way to do this is to download that configuration and deploy it out to all the testing devices that you want to be part of the COS configuration. So you go to the Deployment tab, and you just click on Download Configuration and click, save that file to wherever you want it, and then you'll be able to distribute that file out to the testing devices, and they would automatically then be assigned to the COS, appropriate COS configuration. A lot more information and details on how to do that within the Technology User Guide Volume 3. The last way I want to cover is just how to do it manually. So as you install the DRC Insight applications onto testing devices, as soon as if you're installing those manually or you've just deployed them manually, and you would launch the DRC Insight application, the first thing you would see then is configuration not found. That dialog box would pop up. What you would need to do is click on Assign Device to org unit. This dialog box would pop up. You would put in the org unit ID for the COS configuration, click Add, and then you'd also then click Register to have that device happen. You'll be doing that device by device. Typically, you're going to be doing this only, if you're deploying to a small number of devices. You're going to likely use a previous method for distributing it automatically if you're going to have a large number of testing devices. The other thing we want to just cover real quick is the online testing status site. It is independent of the DRC Insight portal, and because if there's any issues with either of our environments, the online testing or the DRC Insight portal, you'll be able to go to this page to see what's going on. So if you're running into issues, a lot of times the first question is this DRC related or is this locally, a local issue? So if you're having issues, you can always go to this page to see what the status is from an overall DRC delivery standpoint for the online testing and for the DRC Insight portal. Right now, it's representing normal operations. If there was an issue, we would, identify the issue, whether or not the system was totally down or just degraded. You can then click on that and get more information about the status and timeline of the issue. The last thing we want to cover is support. If you have any kind of technical questions, related questions, as you're going through setup and configuration and during testing, don't hesitate to call DRC customer service. They'll be able to handle all your technology related questions. If you have any questions more related to the assessment or policy related questions, those questions would go to DPI, the Office of Student Assessments, and we have both Allison and Jennifer's contact information here for you to be able to contact them directly. Overall, all of our goals here is to create a smooth testing experience. That's what DRC wants, that's what DPI wants, and I'm sure that that's what all of you want as well. So we're here to support you to create that smooth testing experience for both the district and the school's technology and all the folks involved with the administration, and most importantly, the students, that when they sit down to take the test online at their testing devices, they have a really positive experience, and nothing from a technology standpoint gets in the way of them being able to test. So that wraps up the overview. Again, I will recommend that if you want more information, take a look at the training webinar that we have that gives more in-depth on how to install and configure new COS service devices and more background on the overall DRC application. Thank you.